MLS is filled with fierce and intense matchups that add a much-needed spice to the game. From coast to coast, the rivalries define the spirit of the game, with magical moments that stay with us forever. Join me as we dive into the most heated clashes, storied histories, and thrilling encounters that make these rivalries the heartbeat of American soccer. Starting off in number 15, we have Columbus versus Toronto, the Trillium Cup. The Trillium Cup is a rivalry trophy contested between the Columbus Crew and Toronto annually. Named after the official flowers of Ontario, the white trillium, and Ohio, the red trillium, this rivalry was established in 2008, right after Toronto joined MLS in 2007. The rivalry initially came to life by the mayors of the respective cities. Mayor Michael B. Coleman and David Miller had a wager that the mayor of the losing team had to wear the winning team's jersey, and thus the Trillium Cup was born. On March 29, 2008, the first match between Columbus and Toronto started off hot, when Toronto fans bought 2,500 tickets to the inaugural game at Columbus Crew Stadium. They then organized shuttles to Columbus and brought the noise to Columbus in their first head-to-head match, absolutely filling the away section. The team saw each other twice more that season and tied both times, leaving the Crew with an aggregate score of 5-2 in their first season and winning the inaugural Trillium Cup. It wasn't until 2011 when Toronto finally won their first match against the Crew to win their first ever installment of the Trillium Cup that year. The teams hadn't met in the playoffs either until 2017, when Toronto and Columbus met in the Eastern Conference Finals, and Toronto came out on top 1-0, crushing their Trillium rivals and advancing to the MLS Cup final and winning it all that year. The Trillium Cup has been an exciting geographical rivalry, seeing interesting shifts in power and eras of dominance from both teams. Number 14, Orlando versus Atlanta. Orlando versus Atlanta is the clash of the original MLS Southeastern teams. While this rivalry used to be one of the more manufactured rivalries in MLS, it truly has become a gnarly and exciting matchup that many fans look forward to. While there isn't a huge competition between the cities of Orlando and Atlanta, because they were once the only MLS teams in the Southeast, the rivalry has become very real throughout the years. It began with Atlanta United joining the MLS in 2017. Orlando had already found a dedicated fan base as they joined in 2015.
That, now all of a sudden the game starts getting up, emotions are high.
Chanel also involved. I think.
However, with the immediate success that Atlanta saw, it never really felt like a bully kicking the new kid on the block. If anything, with Atlanta's immediate success, Orlando was found fighting back to try and reestablish their regional dominance. Orlando actually went 3 years without winning a single game against Atlanta, and it wasn't until August 29th of 2020 that Orlando finally beat their Southeast rivals with a 3-1 victory. With Josef Martinez's absolute offensive dominance in his time with Atlanta, he was painted as a supervillain in the eyes of Orlando fans as he put up multiple hat tricks on Orlando in their rivalry matchups. Ultimately, the Orlando City versus Atlanta United rivalry is a highlight of the MLS season as it brings passionate fans together with memorable and fun storylines. As both of these teams continue to develop and compete at a high level in the Eastern Conference, this Southern Derby is poised to remain a premier rivalry in MLS. Number 13, we have New England versus the Chicago Fire. With the Rev being one of the first 10 MLS teams and Chicago joining only a year later, this competition has history going back just about as far as the league itself. The Fire almost immediately had success in the league, winning the MLS Cup and the Open Cup in their first ever season.
But Grozny's restart. The header, Razov, Kopu scores! Frankie Klopas becomes the hometown hero, and the Fire does the double!
Whereas the Rev had considerable struggles in their early years within the league. However, these two teams had parallel eras of dominance in the early 2000s with several crucial playoff meetings. The Fire started this rivalry with an upper hand, defeating the Rev in multiple high-stakes matches in the 2000 and 2003 Eastern Conference Finals. However, the Rev got their revenge in 2006, when the two met up again in the Eastern Conference Finals and ultimately, the Rev eliminated their unexpected interconference rivals, thus balancing out the competitive scale between the two teams. In the 10 seasons from 2000 to 2009, these two teams met each other 8 times in the playoffs. These constant encounters in very crucial parts of the year naturally led to one of the most heated and naturally created rivalries in MLS. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about these two teams and their somewhat unknown rivalry, you have to check out Danny T. Radio's video, which is linked above. Number 12, we have Orlando versus Miami. The rivalry between Orlando City and Inter Miami, known as the Florida Derby or the Sunshine Classico, is a constantly developing MLS rivalry that has seen some really cool chapters in its history. This Florida competition is fueled by the geographic proximity of the two heavily contrasting cultures of Orlando and Miami. Ever since Miami joined MLS in 2018, this competition has given the Southeast just another incredible brawl between two titans to follow. With Orlando joining MLS in 2015, they were the team of Florida for a number of years. However, once Miami joined the league in 2018, they had some catching up to do to try and carve themselves a chunk out of the Sunshine State. The inaugural match between Orlando and Miami took place on July 8th, 2020, during the MLS's Back tournament in Orlando. Orlando City triumphed with a dramatic 2-1 victory thanks to Nani scoring the winning goal in stoppage time and ultimately setting the tone for a fierce and competitive rivalry. Throughout the following years, each team racked up wins and showed off their incredible offensive prowess, and neither side really proved dominant over the years. This equal competition only helped make this rivalry that much more interesting, as every matchup is anyone's guess as to who's going to come away with 3 points. Then, of course, in 2024, Miami rehauled their entire team and ultimately became the Barca retirement home. I'm really interested to see how Miami as a club will shift and evolve through the next couple of years under the insane changes going on currently with their organization. And thus, with how Miami changes, I'm extremely excited to see how this cross-state rivalry evolves alongside the clubs. Will we see a mainly underdog rivalry with the smaller market Orlando struggling to hold their ground? Or are we going to see an exciting burst from Miami fizzle out once some of their older players start retiring and leave the void in their squad? Who knows? Number 11, we have Real Salt Lake versus Colorado Rapids. The Rocky Mountain Cup is one of the oldest and most storied rivalries in Major League Soccer. Being a competition between the two Mountain City MLS teams, this one was mostly fueled by their geographic proximity and the competitive spirit between the two cities. The Rocky Mountain Cup is awarded to the team between the two that performs best in the regular season matches between Real Salt Lake and Colorado. The points are tallied based on wins, draws, and the goal differential between the head-to-head matches. Their first ever matchup happened on April 16th in 2005, when RSL first joined the league. This game ended in a 1-0 victory for Colorado. Jeff Cunningham scored the lone goal, marking the beginning of this storied cup. Despite Colorado's initial success in the competition, RSL eventually gained the dominant position, with RSL winning 14 of the 19 Rocky Mountain Cups, going on multiple stretches of winning the cup 3 or more years in a row. With the incredible history of this matchup going 19 years strong now, it is one of the longest standing rivalries this league has ever seen. Despite this, many argue that the cup has ultimately lost a lot of its significance, as the competition seems to not be as fierce as it once was, nor is it as fierce as other famous rivalries in the league. With a club as historically unserious as Colorado is thanks to their horrible ownership, it can be really hard for teams to form meaningful rivalries with them. However, despite this, in my opinion, the mere history of this rivalry alone still makes the Rocky Mountain Cup my 11th favorite MLS rivalry ever. Cracking number 10, we have Seattle versus Toronto. Seattle versus Toronto is one of the more unexpected yet naturally formed rivalries that can be found in MLS. Being 2,100 miles away from each other, this rivalry was not sparked by their geography. Rather, it was sparked by their multiple high-stakes encounters throughout the years. Seattle joined MLS in 2009 and immediately established themselves as one of the strongest names in North American soccer. Toronto entered in 2007, and while they took a bit longer to find success, they eventually built multiple competitive squads throughout the years. In the late 2010s, both teams had emerged as dominant forces in their respective conferences, which led to them seeing each other in the finals multiple times this decade. The 2016 MLS Cup final is where this rivalry's origins can really be traced back to. Both teams had beaten out their conferences and were ready to face off in the MLS Cup final to win their first ever MLS Cup. Both teams went completely scoreless in regular and extra time, bringing these clubs' chances of winning their first MLS Cup down to a PK shootout. After 5 rounds of shooting and an incredible save by Stefan Frei that will go down in MLS history, Seattle came away with their first ever MLS Cup, and Toronto left with a bad taste in their mouth. But it wouldn't be long until Toronto would be able to exact their revenge. Both teams, with the dominant squads they had at the time, met again the year after in the MLS Cup final. This final was held at BMO Field, and Toronto was ready to get rid of the bad taste in their mouth that Seattle had given them the year prior. With 2 goals by Jose Altidore and Victor Vasquez, Toronto came away winning the MLS Cup 2-0 and securing their historic domestic treble, winning the MLS Cup, the Canadian Championship, and the Supporters' Shield. But the story between these two titans of the 2010s was not done yet. In 2019, both teams had their 3rd meeting in the MLS Cup final in only 4 years, this time going to CenturyLink Field in Seattle. The teams were ready to face off and see who would come away with their 2nd MLS Cup final. The game ultimately went Seattle's way, winning 3-1 and giving Seattle the upper hand in the record between the two teams in the MLS Cup finals. What I love so much about this rivalry is that it formed completely naturally. For a league as young as MLS, it can be really hard to have a lot of natural rivalries form because they take time. And I believe that Toronto versus Seattle is one of the first real, naturally formed rivalries that MLS has ever seen. And it was created at such a high level too, being formed from the team's experiences with each other in the finals. This string of high-stakes face-offs between the two teams that at the time were the most dominant teams in the league is super exciting. These two teams had some of the most vocal and excited fan bases in the league, and they both created some of the most memorable moments in recent league history. Number 9, we have St. Louis versus Kansas City. This is the newest rivalry in the league, but despite that, has already gotten hot and seen some insanity go down. This is in part thanks to the geographic proximity, the historical sports animosity between the two cities, and the early matchups. With different names coming up like the I-70 Derby, the Darbecue, or the Soccer Capital Clash, the competition is so new that no specific name has been confirmed just yet. St. Louis City joined MLS in 2023, and Sporting has been in the league ever since the very first season. With the long-standing rivalry in sports such as baseball between the Cardinals and Royals, or even the indoor soccer world between the St. Louis Ambush and KC Comets, these cities had a strong sense of competition, constantly fighting to prove who is the premier Midwest team and who truly owns Missouri. Soccer, specifically MLS history, runs deep in Kansas City, as once again they were one of the very first teams in the league.
It's Mojo time, baby. It's Mojo time, yeah. It's Mojo time.
The Wizards take on the Colorado Rapids in MLS playoff action.
And while St. Louis was pretty late to the MLS train, the city still has plenty of soccer history. In 1950, when the US beat England in the World Cup, a large chunk of the team was actually from St. Louis. Throughout the years, there have been plenty of St. Louis regional soccer leagues, as it was a soccer hub for new immigrants in the 18th and 19th century. St. Louis also had an uber-successful indoor soccer team in the 80s, and ultimately there was a reason that St. Louis is called the soccer capital of the United States. So both teams are sports crazed and specifically soccer crazed, leading to the high stakes nature of this rivalry. Both teams exchanged wins in the 2023 regular season, with their first meeting going St. Louis's way, winning 4-0 against their cross-state rivals. Then St. Louis went to KC and lost 2-1, and to end out the regular season, St. Louis played Sporting at home once again and won 4-1. With St. Louis having a historically dominant expansion season, they ended up being the first seed in the Western Conference playoffs. And with Kansas City having a historically awful start to the season, playing 10 games without a single win, they ultimately snuck into the playoffs thanks to a huge momentum shift towards the end of the season. Kansas City won the wild card slot, meaning that they were going to play the number 1 seed, St. Louis City. And unfortunately for St. Louis fans, this playoff series did not go as planned. With the motivation of seeing the new kids on the block have a record-breaking inaugural season, and themselves having a historically bad start to the season, Kansas City was ready to go out and prove themselves. Sporting ultimately won the playoff series 6-2 and ended their new rivals' year in an embarrassing fashion. Ultimately, the St. Louis City versus Sporting KC rivalry is already a huge fixture in MLS. Characterized by geographic proximity, competitive matches, and extremely passionate fan engagement. As the years go on and St. Louis really establishes itself a bit more after their first year, this rivalry is going to be a gem of Midwestern soccer matchups. If you want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the history of this clash, Sam Likes Soccer made a great brief video on the history of the rivalry, which I definitely recommend you watch, and it is linked at the top of this video right now. At number 8, we have Dallas versus Houston. With the new boys down in Austin, there is now a three-way competition to be the best in the Lone Star State. However, Austin joined in 2021, and before this, there were two, Houston and Dallas. The Texas Derby, as it's called, is a soccer rivalry between the Houston Dynamo and FC Dallas, and for the longest time was the only soccer rivalry in Texas. Dallas was a part of the original MLS teams, and Houston got a team in 2006, when the San Jose Earthquakes moved to Houston and rebranded as the Dynamo. So this rivalry is once again another that is decorated in plenty of rich history. The rivalry started off as hot as you'd expect a rivalry in Texas would. The New Kids won the first year after Houston beat Dallas with a 2-1-1 record in their series that year. This meant that Houston won their first ever installment of the Texas Derby and thus claimed the rights to El Capitan the first season. El Capitan is an 18th century mountain howitzer cannon that the winner of the series gets to take home every single year, which I have to say is one of the coolest trophies for any rivalry ever. In only the second ever season of the Texas Derby, one of the most heated moments in MLS history took place on September 30th, 2007. In a 3-0 domination, when a ball was sent into the box, Clark clattered Dallas's Carlos Ruiz to the ground and then proceeded to crack a full-force kick straight to Ruiz's face. This violent kick led to a skirmish on the field that represented the true passion of North American soccer, specifically in the exciting Texas Derby. So it's easy to say that both teams have held that competitive spirit throughout the years. This extreme passion not just in the stands but on the field, the geographical rivalry that these two cities have, and the extremely unique trophy that is a literal cannon are all reasons why I absolutely love the Texas Derby. Number 7, we have Toronto versus Montreal. The Canadian Classic is the first ever MLS Canadian rivalry. This rivalry actually went back to the NASL pre-MLS days. However, in MLS, it started back in 2012, when Montreal joined the league. With Toronto being an expansion team in 2007, they went 5 years without an in-league Canadian rival. However, Montreal played in the lower tier USL and often faced Toronto in the Canadian Championship, which determines the country's representative in the CONCACAF Champions League. These early encounters outside of MLS laid the foundation for the rivalry, with both teams vying for national pride. Despite the latitude thanks to the national pride at stake and the previous history, these games were heated. They only got hotter though, as in 2015, the teams played each other in the MLS Cup playoffs for the first time, with Montreal eliminating Toronto in the knockout round with a dominating 3-0 win. Then the very next year, the two met each other in the Eastern Conference Finals, where Toronto exacted their revenge and ended the series with a 7-5 goal aggregate, securing their very first MLS Cup final appearance. From 2017 to 2019, Toronto had a historically dominant period, as I talked about earlier in this video. They even got the historic treble, winning the MLS Cup, Supporter Shield, and Canadian Championship in 2017. However, despite this absolute domination of competition by their rival, Montreal continued to stay resilient and competitive, challenging Toronto in fiercely contested matches. In 2020 and 2021, the rivalry continued to intensify with additional meetings in the Canadian Championships, where the two fought for the crown of Canada. These games throughout the years have included names like Didier Drogba, Sebastian Giovinco, and Jose Altidore. Ultimately, Montreal versus Toronto is the premier Canadian clash that is a great representation of Canada's often overlooked love for soccer with their passionate fan bases and dramatics. Number 6, we have New York Red Bulls versus DC United. The rivalry between the Red Bulls and DC United is just another rivalry that is riddled with history, as these two teams were among the inaugural MLS teams. This rivalry is known as the one and only Atlantic Cup, the original MLS Derby of the East Coast. The Derby, officially kicking off in 2002, has given this rivalry plenty of time to grow and fill out an abundant history. DC United kicked off this derby strong, being the Real Madrid of MLS for the first stage of the league. In the early years, DC was dominating New York. However, once the 2000s hit, DC began to slip, and New York started to find their footing, even making a run to the 2008 MLS Cup final. One of the most dramatic encounters between the two teams came in 2012, when DC United defeated the Red Bulls in the Eastern Conference semifinals with a late goal and a snowstorm-delayed second leg. Another significant playoff clash came in 2015, when the Red Bulls overcame DC in the Eastern Conference semifinals, showcasing the intense competition and high stakes of their matchups. The 2010s had an era of domination by the Red Bulls as they won the Supporters' Shield in 2013, 2015, and 2018, while DC had just about no success during that time. However, by 2018, with the opening of Audi Field and the acquisition of star player Wayne Rooney, DC began to grow their influence and ability to compete. Rooney is not the only star player that has seen this rivalry, though. Some of the best players to have ever competed in this league took place in the Atlantic Cup. Thierry Henry and Bradley Wright Phillips competed for the Red Bulls throughout the years, and Jamie Moreno and Ben Olsen competed with DC United. The Atlantic Cup remains one of MLS's most endearing and storied matchups. With a history of dramatic games, playoff battles, regional pride, and star names, it truly continues to be a fun couple of games every year to watch. Breaking into number 5, we have New York City FC versus the New York Red Bulls. This is the first rivalry that we have talked about that is a real derby. A rivalry can be between any clubs no matter the distance between the two. However, a derby is a local rivalry between two clubs that are nearby in proximity. In most of the world, this entails two clubs that are from the same city. Famous examples are Manchester City versus Man United, Celtic versus Rangers, or Inter Milan versus AC Milan. With how large of a span MLS covers, all of the United States and Canada, there are very few situations where it makes sense to put multiple soccer clubs in one city. Thus, a North American derby is usually tied mostly to clubs within the same state, not just the same city. However, there are two cities in MLS that actually do have two teams and thus have authentic derbies, that being LA and, of course, New York City. The famous Hudson River Derby is another relatively new rivalry in the league that is starting to expand its importance in the MLS sphere. The Red Bull organization, previously known as the Metro Stars, has been in the league since the first season, but the Hudson River Derby didn't start until the expansion team New York City FC joined the league in 2015. The Red Bulls have had consistent and moderate success in the league for roughly 2 decades as the sole team in New York City, so New York City FC had to come out punching to really prove themselves worthy in this new rivalry and gain support in the city. However, this didn't exactly go as planned at first for New York City FC. The first meeting between the two teams was on June 28, 2015, where the Red Bulls beat NYCFC 3-1 away. This first game really set the stage for the beginning of this rivalry, as the Red Bulls went on to win all 3 matches between the two in NYCFC's inaugural season. One of the most memorable matches in the Derby's history happened on May 21, 2016, when NYCFC hosted the Red Bulls only to lose 7-0 at home. This game was the biggest margin of victory in the rivalry ever and was a huge moment for Red Bull fans, becoming known as the infamous Red Wedding. This is a classic MLS moment that has a lot of cool history and is a very key event in MLS lore. The highlight video is linked above. I definitely recommend watching it after this video. Another huge moment in this derby was in 2022 on September 17th, when NYCFC scored one of the quickest MLS goals ever on the Red Bulls in the 50th second of the game. The current record between the two is 15 wins for the Red Bulls, 4 draws, and 8 wins for NYCFC. While NYCFC has historically struggled against the Red Bulls, they have in fact had more success in the MLS Cup than the Red Bulls. Despite the Red Bulls making the playoffs 14 seasons in a row, which is a Major League sports record in the United States, they have never reached the summit and won the MLS Cup. Ever. However, in only their 7th season of existence, NYCFC climbed the summit and won their first ever MLS Cup, beating Portland and being the first team to bring the MLS Cup championship to New York City. With NYCFC building a new stadium in Queens in the next couple of years and thus hopefully expanding their reach in the city, it'll be really interesting to see where this rivalry goes and how it changes throughout the years. Will the Red Bulls be able to continue their constant success that they have proven in their existence and eventually win their first ever MLS Cup? Or will NYCFC be known as the one and only New York City team to ever be crowned champions and become the big dog in the New York City market? Number 4, we have LA Galaxy versus San Jose Earthquakes. The California Classico is another storied and intense matchup between the two longtime MLS California teams, LA Galaxy and the San Jose Earthquakes. These two teams were once again two teams that were a part of the inaugural MLS season. The Galaxy quickly established themselves as a dominant force, consistently reaching the playoffs, however only securing their first MLS Cup in 2002. While the Quakes were initially less successful, they eventually found their stride in the early 2000s with the MLS Cup win in 2001 and 2003. The Donovan saga is one of the most significant factors that fueled this rivalry. Landon Donovan, one of the best American soccer players of all time, and considered by just about everybody to have the best MLS career, started his MLS career with the Quakes. It was this time when he helped San Jose win 2 of their MLS Cups. However, eventually, Donovan fueled the fire and moved to San Jose's bitter rival, the Galaxy. This move only added another layer of intensity to this rivalry, as the Quakes felt bitterly betrayed by the loss of their star player. This led to intense fan hatred to Donovan, and ultimately rose the fan passion on both sides. There's a really great video about the history of the California Classico, specifically with Landon's saga on the MLS channel. The video is linked at the top of this video. However, Donovan is not the only star to have competed in the California Classico. Names like Chris Wondolowski, Dwayne De Rosario, David Beckham, and Zlatan Ibrahimovic. In 2006, the Quakes were relocated to Houston, which ultimately paused this heated California rivalry. But only 2 years later, San Jose was awarded an expansion team in 2008, allowing for this rivalry to quickly heat back up, with both teams eager to reassert their dominance in the Golden State. Then from 2010 to 2014, the Goonies era began for the Quakes, which led to some of the most memorable matches in the rivalry ever. The Goonies era was a time where the Quakes had the best start to a season that they had ever had, thanks to a ton of late game goals. After a game against Galaxy in which the Quakes scored 3 times in the last 18 minutes to win 3-2, Steven Lenhart, a San Jose striker at the time, declared, "Goonies never die," which gave the Goonies era a name. The Quakes won the Supporters' Shield this year and had another thriller against Galaxy, where they famously won 4-3 with an incredible finish to the game. The Galaxy, with their star-studded lineups, oftentimes is seen as the big dog, but the Quakes have always risen to the challenge and make these matchups unpredictable and electrifying. The Galaxy and Quakes rivalry, encapsulated by the California Classico, remains one of the most captivating and endearing matchups in MLS. With a rich history of pushing the line of what MLS can be, displaying high-quality talent and passionate fan bases, the California Classico is one of the best rivalries this league has ever seen. Now into the top 3, we have none other than Cincinnati versus Columbus. The rivalry between these two Ohio towns began well before Cincinnati joined MLS. FC Cincinnati was founded in 2016 and played in the USL. The first match between the two sides occurred during the 2017 Open Cup, where Cincy actually upset the Crew and won 1-0, marking an early and significant victory for the fledgling club. This interstate rivalry was set up perfectly by early meetings of the two teams before Cincy was even a part of the league. Then in 2018, Cincy was awarded an expansion franchise in MLS. The first game between the two clubs happened on August 10, 2019, and ended in a 2-2 draw at MAPFRE Stadium in Columbus. This game was notable for its intense atmosphere thanks to the large numbers of away fans in attendance thanks to the close geography of the two cities. The rivalry was quickly given one of the most creative rivalry names MLS has ever seen, with the Hell is Real moniker. This was inspired by a prominent religious billboard on Interstate 71, the highway connecting Cincinnati and Columbus, which simply reads, "Hell is Real." This moniker captures the fiery nature of the matches and the heated rivalry between the two Ohio teams. In the first year, Cincinnati had historic struggles, earning the coveted wooden spoon 3 seasons in a row. This means they finished bottom in the entire table 3 years in a row. With Columbus having a more established presence in MLS and a solid lineup around this time, Cincy was truly an underdog in this rivalry in every metric. In 2020, even Columbus dominated Cincy and went on to win the MLS Cup that season. However, in 2021, with the opening of TQL Stadium, Cincy had a new state-of-the-art venue for hosting future games, which gave the organization more confidence against their interstate rival. Things got really heated in 2023 when Columbus had an extremely strong crew put together, and Cincy went from getting 3 wooden spoons in a row to a season where they were on track to possibly break an all-time regular season points record. The two teams from Ohio were some of the best in the league at the time, and tensions were high going into the playoffs. And of course, both teams reached the Eastern Conference Final in perfect Cinderella fashion. This matchup would be a 1-game series in the home stadium of the higher-seeded team, which was Cincy. Cincy scored early in the 14th with a goal from Vasquez and scored once more in the first half from a goal by Acosta in the 3rd added minute of the first half. Things were looking bad for Columbus as they were down 2-0 at TQL Stadium against their hungry interstate rivals in the conference finals with only 45 minutes left to even the score. Columbus then proceeded to have one of the most iconic MLS comeback games, scoring in the 75th, 86th, and then an extra time in the 115th minute. This game was a massive moment for this rivalry, since he had a chance to make it to their first ever MLS Cup final after a nearly record-breaking regular season despite their history of wooden spoons, and the only thing in their way was the Crew. And the Crew proceeded to beat them, going to the MLS Cup final, and then beat LAFC to be crowned the MLS Cup champions. Hell is Real is truly a beautiful representation of the passion that there is in the Midwest for soccer that not many people realize exists. The roots in the regional proximity and early competitive matches has allowed this rivalry to immediately become a highlight of the MLS season. Moving on to the second best rivalry in MLS, we have LA Galaxy versus LAFC. The second authentic derby that is found within MLS is the one and only El Tráfico between Galaxy and LAFC. This is one of the highest profile and coolest rivalries in all of North America, found in one of America's soccer hotbeds, LA. The Galaxy for the longest time was the only team representing the LA market, until 2018 when LAFC was the next MLS expansion team, which represented the City of Angels. The name El Tráfico pokes fun at the globally notorious traffic congestion found in LA, thus symbolizing the intense and often chaotic nature of these matches. The first ever match between the two took place on March 31st, 2018, at Galaxy's StubHub Center. This game immediately became one of the most iconic MLS matches, as LAFC took a 3-0 lead over Galaxy. However, Galaxy's secret weapon, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, had one of, if not the most notable and impressive debut performances ever, scoring twice, including a 40-yard strike and a last-minute winner to ultimately give the Galaxy a 4-3 victory. The rivalry continues to grow in intensity with each meeting. The matches are characterized by high scoring, dramatic comebacks, and physical play. LAFC established themselves as one of the league's top teams, winning the Supporters' Shield in 2019 with a record-breaking season. However, despite LAFC's regular season success, the Galaxy often tend to have the upper hand in direct encounters, adding fuel to the fire. Then the teams met in the playoffs for the first time on October 24th, 2019, in the Western Conference semifinals. In a high-octane match, LAFC secured their first ever victory over the Galaxy, winning 5-3 and moving on to the conference finals. This game was filled by numerous goals, an extremely fast pace, and the ongoing rivalry between star players like Carlos Vela and Zlatan. Throughout the years, El Tráfico has continued producing exciting and closely contested matches despite both teams changing coaching staff and seeing star players come and go. These spectacles sell an impressive amount of tickets and bring eyes to the league. The most attended MLS game in history actually happened during El Tráfico on July 4th, 2023 in the Rose Bowl with 82,110 fans. The consistently exciting games filled with impressive goals and plays shows El Tráfico's ability to capture the essence of soccer in Los Angeles. This rivalry continues to be a highlight of the MLS season, reflecting the passion and excitement that both teams bring to the league. And this brings us to my absolute favorite MLS rivalry of all time, Seattle versus Portland. The Seattle versus Portland rivalry is another one that goes back far before MLS was even a thought. The original Seattle Sounders were founded in 1974, and the Portland Timbers followed in 1975. Both in the North American Soccer League, or NASL. Their first meeting took place on May 2nd in 1975, with Seattle winning 1-0. Throughout the years, the two teams met and clashed constantly in NASL play. After the NASL collapsed in 1984, the rivalry was revived in lower soccer divisions, particularly in the A-League and the USL. Matches during this time maintained intense spirit due to the regional pride and citywide rivalry that Seattle and Portland have. Seattle joined MLS as an expansion team in 2009, bringing their franchise into the highest level of American soccer once again, and immediately seeing success, proving themselves to be one of the most elite teams in the league. Portland was left behind in the USL, and after a game between the two on July 1st, 2009 in the Open Cup, Seattle won 2-1, thus rubbing it into their southern neighbors' faces. The Timbers ultimately followed suit only 2 years later and became an MLS expansion team in 2011. The anticipation for renewed top-flight clashes between the two Cascadian teams was high, and the rivalry did not disappoint. The first meeting between the two in the MLS era was on May 14th, 2011, at Seattle's CenturyLink Stadium, which ended in a 1-1 draw, immediately showing off the even match spirit of this rivalry. On October 7th, 2012, Seattle hosted Portland in front of 66,452 fans, which was the second largest standalone crowd in MLS history at the time. Another time the two met in the Open Cup was in the first round of 2015. Seattle, the defending Open Cup champions at the time, ended the game with only 6 players, after 3 of them were sent off by the ref with reds. Obafemi Martins was injured, and all 3 of Seattle's subs had already been used. The final red card of the game was given to Clint Dempsey for tearing up the notebook of ref Daniel Radford, which got Dempsey suspended from the Open Cup for 3 games. Due to the conditions of the game and the fact that Seattle was playing with literally half of their team by the end of the game, Portland ended up winning 3-1. This game was later nicknamed the Red Card Wedding, thus going down in MLS and Open Cup history. The highlight video of the game is linked above. I suggest you check that out too, it's really funny. One of the most insane stats about this rivalry is that from 2015 to 2021, either Portland or Seattle represented the MLS Western Conference in the MLS Cup title. This 7-year run displays the absolute domination these two teams had on the league and the intense, high-talent rivalry that the two had. The many iconic Seattle versus Portland fixtures throughout the years have hosted soccer stars by the names of Clint Dempsey, Diego Valeri, Raul Ruidiaz, and Diego Chara. The Seattle versus Portland rivalry displays some of the biggest crowds in the league, the best fan-made tifos, the most culturally rich fan traditions, highest level of talent in the league, most intense regional pride and competitive spirit, and longest soccer rivalry in American soccer history. It is for all of these reasons that the Portland versus Seattle rivalry is my absolute favorite MLS competition to represent our league as a whole.